The plate shattered on the floor before Maria even understood what had happened. She had been sitting alone in the corner booth of the diner, halfway through her meal, when a loud voice cut through the noise of clinking forks and quiet conversations. A man at the table across from her, tall and smug, was laughing with his friends. Then his eyes landed on her, and his laughter turned into something cruel. "Look at her," he said, not even lowering his voice. "Eating like that, and still wondering why no man wants her. You're too big to love, sweetheart. Might want to skip dessert." The whole diner seemed to freeze. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died. Maria felt her face burn hot, her hands trembling around her fork. She wanted to disappear into the floor. She had heard cruel words before, more times than she could count, but hearing them shouted across a crowded room in front of strangers hit differently. Her throat tightened. She reached for her coat, ready to leave without finishing her meal, without saying a word, the way she always did when the world reminded her she wasn't wanted. Then a chair scraped against the tile floor. A man rose from the table beside hers, tall, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes that still held warmth. His name was Daniel. Beside him, a little girl with braided hair looked up from her chicken fingers, confused by the sudden silence. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was calm, steady, and it carried through the diner like a blade through paper. "You should apologize to her," Daniel said, looking directly at the man who had spoken. The man scoffed, waving a hand. "Mind your business, man. I was just being honest." "There's a difference between honesty and cruelty," Daniel replied. "What you did wasn't either. It was just mean, and you did it because you wanted people to laugh with you instead of at you." A few people in the diner murmured in agreement. The man's friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, no longer laughing. The man's face reddened, embarrassment replacing his earlier smugness. "Whatever," he muttered, grabbing his jacket. "Let's go." He and his friends left quickly, the bell above the door jingling as they disappeared into the night. The diner slowly returned to its usual hum, but Maria remained frozen, staring down at her half-eaten plate, her cheeks still burning. She felt exposed, like every eye in the room was still on her, judging her, agreeing silently with the man who had just left. Daniel turned to her, his expression gentle. "Hey," he said softly. "Are you okay?" Maria looked up, surprised anyone was still paying attention to her. She nodded quickly, though her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. "I'm fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for that. You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Daniel said simply. He glanced back at his daughter, who was watching Maria with curious, sympathetic eyes. "Would you like to sit with us? You don't have to eat alone tonight." Maria hesitated. Every instinct told her to refuse, to slip away quietly and lick her wounds in private, the way she always did. But something about Daniel's calm sincerity made her pause. There was no pity in his eyes, no forced kindness, just genuine warmth. "I don't want to intrude," she said quietly. "You wouldn't be," Daniel said. "Please. Lily would love the company. Wouldn't you, Lily?" The little girl nodded enthusiastically, patting the empty seat beside her. "You can help me finish my fries. Daddy says I eat too slow." Despite herself, Maria felt a small smile tug at her lips. She glanced around the diner one more time, half expecting judgmental stares, but found none. Most people had already returned to their meals, uninterested in her beyond the momentary drama. Slowly, she gathered her plate and moved to the table beside Daniel and Lily. "Thank you," she said again as she sat down. "You don't need to keep thanking me," Daniel said with a small smile. Anyone with decency would have done the same. But Maria knew that wasn't true. She had spent years watching people stay silent, while others mocked her, watched friends laugh along rather than risk their own popularity to defend her. Daniel's kindness felt different, rare, almost unbelievable. As they ate, Lily filled the silence with cheerful chatter about her day at school, about a drawing she had made of a dragon, about how she wanted a puppy for her birthday. Maria found herself laughing genuinely for the first time in weeks, the tension from earlier slowly melting away. "She's got a lot of energy," Maria said, watching Lily swing her legs under the table. "You have no idea," Daniel said, chuckling. "She gets it from her mother." Something in his voice shifted slightly, a subtle heaviness beneath the words. Maria noticed, but didn't push. Instead, she focused back on Lily, who was now insisting Maria try her chocolate milkshake. As the evening went on, Maria learned small things about Daniel. He worked as a contractor, building homes for families around the city. He loved cooking, though Lily insisted his pancakes were too crunchy. He had an easy laugh, one that came often and without effort, especially when Lily said something silly. In turn, Daniel asked Maria questions too, but not the kind she was used to. He didn't ask about her weight, her diet, or anything related to her appearance. He asked about her job as a nurse, about what she loved most about helping patients, about her favorite books and the little dog she had growing up. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Maria felt seen as a person, not as a body to be judged or mocked. As the night wound down and the diner began to empty, Daniel helped Lily into her jacket, while Maria gathered her things. "It was really nice meeting you both," Maria said, smiling genuinely. "Likewise," Daniel replied. He hesitated for a moment, before pulling out his phone. "Would it be all right if I got your number? I'd like to make sure you're doing okay after tonight, and Lily would probably ask about you for weeks if I didn't." Maria felt her heart flutter unexpectedly. It had been so long since anyone had asked for her number, with genuine interest, rather than fleeting curiosity. She nodded, exchanging numbers with him, feeling a small spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. As she walked to her car that night, the cold air biting at her cheeks, Maria replayed the evening in her mind. The cruel words from the stranger still echoed faintly, but they no longer felt as heavy. Instead, she thought of Daniel's steady voice standing up for her, of Lily's bright laughter, of the warmth she had felt sitting at their table. For the first time in a long time, Maria allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, kindness like that still existed in the world, and maybe it was meant for her too. She drove home slower than usual that night, unwilling to let the feeling fade too quickly. When she finally reached her apartment, she sat in her car for a moment, staring at the phone number now saved in her contacts. Daniel Carter. Simple, unassuming, yet somehow it felt significant. Inside her apartment, she changed into comfortable clothes and sat on her couch, replaying the events of the night once more. She thought about how quickly her evening had shifted from humiliation to comfort, how a stranger's cruelty had unexpectedly led her to kindness she hadn't expected to find. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, though she immediately knew who it was. "Hey, it's Daniel from the diner. Just wanted to make sure you got home safe. Lily made me promise to ask if you'd want to get ice cream with us sometime. No pressure, though." Maria smiled at her phone, her fingers hovering over the screen before typing back. "I got home safe, thank you. And tell Lily I would love that." She set her phone down, staring at the ceiling, allowing herself a rare moment of hope. Life had taught her to guard her heart carefully, to expect disappointment before it arrived, but something about tonight felt different. Something about Daniel felt different. Still, doubts crept in as she lay in bed that night. She had been hurt before by moments that seemed promising, only to be reminded painfully of her own insecurities later. She wondered if this was simply another fleeting kindness, one that would fade once the novelty wore off. But beneath the doubt, a small flicker of hope remained, refusing to be extinguished. As she drifted off to sleep, her mind wandered back to the diner, to the sound of Daniel's voice defending her, calm and unwavering, and to the warmth of Lily's laughter filling the space where cruelty had tried to take root. For the first time in years, Maria allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't simply tolerated, but genuinely wanted. Whether that future was truly beginning, or simply a beautiful moment destined to fade, she wasn't sure. But she was willing to find out. The next morning, Maria woke up earlier than her alarm, her mind still lingering on the previous night. She made her coffee slowly, staring out her kitchen window at the quiet street below, replaying the diner scene over and over. Each time, the sting of the stranger's words lessened slightly, replaced instead by the memory of Daniel's steady defense and Lily's innocent joy. She glanced at her phone, half expecting the conversation from the night before to have been a dream. But there it was, saved clearly in her messages. Daniel Carter. Real, tangible proof that kindness still existed, even after cruelty had tried its best to convince her otherwise. As she got ready for her shift at the hospital, Maria caught her reflection in the mirror longer than usual. She studied herself carefully, without the familiar critical voice that usually accompanied such moments. Instead, she saw someone who had been strong enough to sit through humiliation and rise above it, someone who had allowed herself, even briefly, to accept unexpected kindness. Work that day passed in a blur of familiar routines, checking charts, comforting worried families, offering gentle reassurance to frightened patients. But throughout her shift, thoughts of the previous night kept resurfacing, a quiet warmth she couldn't quite shake, nor did she want to. During her lunch break, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. "Lily wants to know if unicorns are real. I told her to ask you, since you're the expert on everything apparently." Maria laughed audibly, drawing curious glances from her coworkers. She typed back quickly. "Tell Lily unicorns are absolutely real. They just don't like showing themselves to people who don't believe." "She's going to hold you to that," Daniel replied almost instantly. "Better start practicing your unicorn knowledge." Maria smiled, tucking her phone away as her break ended, warmth blooming quietly in her chest. She refused to rush ahead into disappointment, having no way of knowing whether these small conversations would grow into something meaningful or simply remain fleeting. But for now, she allowed herself to enjoy the comfort of simple kindness, embracing the unexpected joy that had followed cruelty, unsure of where it might lead, but grateful nonetheless for two strangers who had chosen kindness over indifference. As Maria finished her shift and walked out into the cool evening air, she felt lighter than she had in months. The words from the stranger the night before still lingered somewhere in the back of her mind, but they no longer held the same power. Instead, they had become simply another difficult moment she had survived, overshadowed entirely by the warmth of two new friends who had reminded her, gently and without effort, that she was worth defending. At the nurse's station, her closest coworker, a cheerful woman named Grace, noticed the change in her almost immediately. Grace had worked beside Maria for 3 years, long enough to recognize when something had shifted beneath the surface. "You've been smiling at your phone all day," Grace said, leaning against the counter with a knowing grin. "Who is he?" Maria felt her cheeks warm. "It's nothing, just someone I met last night." "Nothing doesn't make you smile like that," Grace teased, crossing her arms. "Come on, tell me everything." Maria hesitated, unsure how much of the previous night she wanted to relive out loud, the humiliation still tender beneath the surface, even if the memory of Daniel's kindness had softened it. But Grace's warm patience won her over, and slowly, Maria recounted the evening at the diner, the cruel words from the stranger, the sudden silence that followed, and then Daniel rising from his seat to defend her without hesitation. Grace's expression shifted from curiosity to quiet anger on Maria's behalf. "People are terrible," she muttered, "but this Daniel sounds like one of the good ones. Not many men would stand up like that in front of a room full of strangers." "He has a daughter," Maria said. "Lily. She's 5, maybe 6. She's the sweetest thing." "So he's a single dad too," Grace said, raising an eyebrow. "That's rare. Most men run the other way at the mention of extra responsibility." Maria shrugged, though her chest tightened slightly at the thought. "I don't know if it's anything. We just talked. He got my number so he could check that I got home safe. And he's already texting you about unicorns," Grace said, smirking. "Sounds like more than nothing to me." Maria laughed, despite herself, shaking her head. "It's not like that. I barely know him." But even as she said it, she wondered if that was entirely true. In the span of one evening, Daniel had shown her more genuine consideration than most people offered after months of friendship. He hadn't stared at her differently once the cruel comment had been made. He hadn't offered pity or awkward reassurance. He had simply treated her the way she had always wanted to be treated, like someone whose feelings mattered, like someone worth defending. The rest of her shift passed quickly, filled with the usual demands of the hospital, patients needing comfort, families needing updates, charts needing attention. But throughout it all, a quiet warmth stayed with her, steady and unshaken by the chaos around her. When her shift finally ended, Maria changed out of her scrubs and gathered her things, saying goodbye to Grace with a promise to share updates soon. Walking out into the cool evening air, She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, the city lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled over the streets. Her phone buzzed once more as she reached her car. Another message from Daniel. Lily wants to know if you're free this weekend. She's decided you're her new best friend, apparently. No pressure, but she can be very persuasive. Maria stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the same flutter of hope she had felt the night before. She thought about her usual weekends, quiet and solitary, spent avoiding places where she might run into people who looked at her the way that stranger had. She thought about how different this invitation felt, warm and genuine rather than something to brace against. She typed her reply carefully. Tell Lily I would love that. What did she have in mind? The response came quickly, along with a small laughing emoji. Ice cream and a trip to the park. She has very simple taste for someone so persuasive. Maria smiled, sliding into her car and starting the engine. As she pulled out onto the street, she allowed herself to think, just for a moment, about what the weekend might hold, not with the guarded caution she usually carried, expecting disappointment before it arrived, but with a quiet, tentative hope that maybe this time would be different. She didn't know yet how much that single evening at the diner would change the course of her life. She didn't know that the man who had defended her against cruelty would soon become the person who taught her what it truly meant to be chosen, fully and without condition. All she knew, driving home beneath the darkening sky, was that for the first time in a long while, she was looking forward to what came next. And as she drove home that evening, Maria allowed herself, cautiously but genuinely, to hope for what tomorrow might bring. Maria's heart slammed against her ribs the moment she realized Lily was gone. 1 second, the little girl had been standing beside the swings, giggling as she waited her turn, and the next, the space where she stood was empty. Maria spun in a full circle, scanning the crowded park, her breath catching in her throat. Daniel had stepped away only for a minute to buy ice cream from the cart near the entrance, and Maria had promised to watch her. "Lily?" Maria called out, her voice sharper than she intended. She hurried toward the slides, then the sandbox, weaving between strangers and startled parents. "Lily, where are you?" Panic tightened around her chest like a fist. She had known Daniel and Lily for only 2 weeks, yet the fear pulsing through her felt as intense as if Lily were her own. She rushed toward a cluster of trees at the edge of the playground, praying she would find the small braided head bobbing somewhere within view. Then she heard it, a soft giggle coming from behind a large oak tree. Maria rounded the trunk and found Lily crouched low, completely unbothered, examining a small caterpillar crawling along a fallen leaf. "Lily," Maria breathed, dropping to her knees beside her, relief flooding through her so quickly it made her dizzy. "You scared me. You can't wander off like that." Lily looked up, unaware of the panic she had caused. "I found a caterpillar. Look, Maria, it's fuzzy." Maria let out a shaky laugh, pulling the little girl into a gentle hug despite the initial urge to scold her further. "It's very fuzzy," she agreed, her voice softening. "But you have to stay where I can see you, okay? You gave me quite a scare." "Sorry," Lily said, though her attention had already drifted back to the caterpillar. Just then, Daniel appeared around the corner, 2 melting ice cream cones in his hands, and confusion written across his face. "There you two are. I looked over and you'd disappeared." "She found a caterpillar," Maria explained, standing and brushing grass from her knees. "Gave me a small heart attack in the process." Daniel's expression shifted instantly to concern, kneeling beside his daughter. "Lily, you know you're supposed to stay close. What did we talk about?" "I know, Daddy," Lily said, unbothered by the mild scolding, already standing and reaching for her melting ice cream cone instead. "But it was a really cool caterpillar." Daniel sighed, though a small smile tugged at his lips as he stood back up. He glanced at Maria, gratitude clear in his eyes. "Thank you for finding her so fast. I don't know what I would have done." "She wasn't far," Maria said, though her heart was still settling from the scare. "But maybe we should stick closer together for the rest of the afternoon." They spent the next hour wandering the park together, Lily skipping ahead occasionally, but always glancing back to make sure Maria and Daniel were still within sight. The earlier scare seemed to draw the 3 of them closer, an unspoken understanding forming between them that they were, in some small way, already looking out for one another. As Lily grew tired and settled onto a park bench with her melted ice cream, Daniel and Maria found themselves standing a little apart, watching her contentedly draw shapes in the dirt with a stick. "She really likes you," Daniel said quietly. "She doesn't usually warm up to people this fast." "She's easy to love," Maria replied, smiling as she watched Lily hum softly to herself. "You've done a wonderful job raising her." Daniel's expression grew a touch more serious, though his tone remained gentle. "It hasn't always been easy. After her mother passed, I wasn't sure I was doing anything right. Some days I still don't." Maria turned to face him fully, sensing the weight behind his words. "You clearly are. She's happy, curious, kind. That doesn't happen by accident." Daniel gave a small, appreciative nod, though his eyes carried a distant sadness that Maria recognized from her own quiet grief over the years, the kind that never fully disappeared, but simply became easier to carry. "Thank you for saying that," he said softly. "It means more than you probably realize." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Lily chase a butterfly that had landed near her drawing. Maria felt a warmth settle over her, different from anything she had felt in years. Not the fleeting comfort of politeness, but something steadier, something that felt like it might last. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket, breaking the quiet moment. She glanced down and felt her stomach twist slightly. It was a message from her mother, asking if she was coming to Sunday dinner. Maria hesitated, the familiar tension of family gatherings creeping into her thoughts. Her mother meant well, but she often made comments about Maria's weight, disguised as concern, that left Maria feeling small long after the conversation ended. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, noticing the shift in her expression. "Just my mom," Maria said, forcing a small smile. "Family dinners can be complicated." Daniel nodded knowingly. "Complicated family. I understand that more than you'd think. My mother has strong opinions about most things, including who I should be spending my time with." Maria felt a flicker of nervousness at his words, wondering if his mother's opinions extended to her, but Daniel seemed to sense her unspoken worry, and reached out, gently squeezing her hand in reassurance. "Don't worry about that," he said. "What matters is how Lily and I feel, not anyone else's opinions." Maria appreciated his confidence, though a small part of her couldn't help but wonder how long that confidence would hold, once outside pressures grew louder. Still, she pushed the worry aside for now, choosing instead to enjoy the warmth of the present moment. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the park, Daniel suggested they grab dinner before heading home. Lily eagerly agreed, already recovered from her earlier ice cream and ready for more food. They settled into a small pizza place near the park, the three of them sharing a large pepperoni pizza, while Lily recounted, in great detail, the story of the caterpillar she had found earlier. "It was this big," Lily said, holding her fingers only a few inches apart despite her earlier claim of the caterpillar being enormous. "That's still pretty big for a caterpillar," Maria said, playing along with a smile. Daniel watched the exchange with quiet contentment, his earlier tension from the mention of his mother fading into the background. He appreciated how naturally Maria interacted with Lily, without forced enthusiasm or hesitant discomfort that some adults displayed around children. It felt effortless, as though she had always been meant to be part of these small, ordinary moments. As dinner wound down, and Lily grew sleepy from the day's excitement, Daniel offered to drive Maria back to her car at the park. The ride was quiet, filled with the comfortable silence of two people growing steadily closer, unwilling yet to name the change, but both aware of it nonetheless. When they arrived, Daniel walked Maria to her car, Lily already dozing softly in her car seat. "Thank you for today," he said. "Lily hasn't stopped talking about you since the diner. I think she might replace me as her favorite person soon." Maria laughed softly. "I doubt that, but thank you for inviting me. Today was..." She paused, searching for the right word. "It was really nice. Really needed, actually." Daniel studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You deserve nice days, Maria. More than you probably let yourself believe." His words settled deep within her chest, gentle yet significant, the kind of statement that lingered long after it was spoken. She offered a small, grateful smile before saying goodnight and climbing into her car. As she drove home that evening, Maria replayed the day in her mind. The initial fear of losing sight of Lily, the quiet vulnerability in Daniel's voice when discussing his late wife, the warmth of shared laughter over pizza. Each moment had woven together into something she hadn't realized she was missing, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Yet beneath the warmth, a small worry lingered, the mention of Daniel's mother and her strong opinions settling uneasily in the back of Maria's mind. She wondered how much of Daniel's confidence would remain once faced directly with disapproval, and whether she was ready to face another round of judgment, this time from someone whose opinion clearly mattered deeply to the man she was quickly beginning to care for. But for tonight, she chose not to dwell on uncertain futures. Instead, she allowed herself to simply enjoy the warmth of a day well spent, the laughter of a little girl who had claimed her as a favorite person, and the steady, quiet affection growing between herself and a man who had first stood up for her when the world had tried to tear her down. Later that night, after tucking Lily into bed, Daniel sat alone in his kitchen, staring at his phone. He knew his mother Patricia would call eventually, and he wasn't sure he was ready for the conversation. Sure enough, within minutes, her name appeared on the screen. "Daniel," Patricia said, the moment he answered, her tone brisk and businesslike. "Your sister mentioned you've been spending time with someone, a woman from a diner of all places." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temple. His sister had a habit of sharing details before he was ready to. "Her name is Maria, Mom. She's a nurse. Lily adores her." "A nurse," Patricia repeated, her tone unreadable. "And what does she look like?" Daniel frowned at the strange question. "What does that have to do with anything?" "I'm simply asking," Patricia said carefully. "Your sister mentioned she's a larger woman. I only want to make sure you're thinking clearly, Daniel. Lily needs stability, not distractions." Daniel felt a flash of irritation rise within him, sharper than he expected. "Maria isn't a distraction, Mom. She's kind, she's patient with Lily, and she treats both of us with more respect than most people bother to offer. Her weight has nothing to do with any of that." Patricia was quiet for a moment, though Daniel could sense her disapproval humming beneath the silence. "I just don't want you rushing into something out of loneliness," she finally said. "You've been through so much since Rachel passed. I worry you're settling for the first person who shows you kindness." Daniel closed his eyes, frustration and grief tangling together at the mention of his late wife. "I'm not settling, Mom. Maria makes me want to be better, not just for myself, but for Lily too. That's not something I take lightly." Patricia sighed audibly through the phone. "I only want what's best for you and Lily, Daniel. I hope you understand that." "I know," Daniel said, softening slightly despite his frustration. "But I need you to trust my judgment here. Maria is good for us. I hope you'll give her a real chance before deciding otherwise." The call ended shortly after, leaving Daniel staring at his phone with a heavy feeling settling in his chest. He hadn't expected his mother's reaction to sting quite as much as it did, especially after such a wonderful day with Maria and Lily. He wondered briefly if he should mention the conversation to Maria, then decided against it for now, not wanting to introduce unnecessary worry before their relationship had even properly begun. Across town, Maria sat curled on her couch, a cup of tea warming her hands as she replayed the day's events once more. Her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Today was one of the best days I've had in a long time. Thank you for being part of it." Maria smiled softly, typing back a reply. "Same here. Tell Lily I said goodnight, and that her caterpillar story was the highlight of my week." "Will do," Daniel replied, followed by a small laughing emoji. "Good night, Maria." She set her phone aside, sinking further into her couch cushions, allowing herself a rare moment of uncomplicated happiness. For years, she had built quiet walls around her heart, protecting herself from disappointment before it could arrive. But today, standing beside Daniel in the golden evening light, watching Lily chase butterflies through the grass, those walls had felt just a little thinner, a little easier to lower. Still, the earlier mention of Daniel's mother lingered faintly in her mind, an unspoken worry she couldn't quite shake. She had faced disapproval before, cruel words from strangers, careful concern disguised as criticism from her own family. She wondered if she had the strength to face it again, this time from someone whose approval clearly mattered deeply to the man she was falling for. But as she finished her tea and settled into bed that night, Maria chose, for now, to hold on to the warmth of the day rather than the uncertainty of what might come next. Tomorrow would bring whatever challenges it needed to bring. Tonight, she simply allowed herself to feel, for the first time in years, genuinely and quietly happy. Maria's phone rang at 7 in the morning, far too early for anything good. She fumbled for it on her nightstand, her heart already racing before she even saw the name on the screen. Daniel. He never called this early. "Hello?" she answered, sitting up quickly. "Maria, I'm sorry to call so early," Daniel said, his voice tight with stress. "Lily's daycare called. They had a pipe burst overnight, and they're closed for the day. I have a site inspection I can't miss, and I don't know what to do." Maria's mind raced through her schedule, relief washing over her that the emergency wasn't more serious. "I don't work until this afternoon. I can watch her if you want." There was a pause on the line, surprise evident in Daniel's silence. "Are you sure? I know it's a lot to ask." "Daniel, I'd love to spend the morning with her," Maria said, already climbing out of bed. "Bring her over, or I can come to you, whatever's easier." Relief flooded through the phone. "I'll drop her off in 20 minutes. Thank you, Maria." Truly. 2 weeks had passed since the day at the park, and in that time, Maria had grown steadily closer to both Daniel and Lily, their bond deepening with each shared dinner, each quiet phone call, each small moment stitched together into something that felt increasingly permanent. Being trusted with Lily, even for a single unexpected morning, felt like a quiet but significant milestone. When Daniel arrived, Lily bounded out of the car in her pajamas, clutching a stuffed rabbit, and grinning as though the daycare closure was the best surprise of her young life. "Maria! We get to hang out today." "We sure do," Maria said, crouching down to greet her with a warm hug. "What should we do first?" "Pancakes," Lily declared immediately. Daniel laughed, handing Maria a small bag with Lily's things. "She's obsessed lately." "Fair warning, she'll critique your technique. She's very particular." "I think I can handle some pancake criticism," Maria said, smiling as Daniel knelt down to say goodbye to his daughter. "Be good for Maria," he told Lily, kissing the top of her head. "I'll be back this afternoon." "I'm always good," Lily said matter-of-factly, already tugging Maria toward the kitchen. Daniel lingered for a moment at the door, watching the easy affection between Maria and his daughter with an expression Maria couldn't quite read, somewhere between gratitude and something deeper, something he hadn't fully put into words yet. "Thank you again," he said softly before leaving. "I don't know many people who would drop everything like this." "I wanted to," Maria said simply, echoing the words he had once told her that very first night at the diner. The morning passed in a happy blur of slightly lopsided pancakes, spilled orange juice, and an impromptu dance party in the living room when Lily discovered Maria's phone had music on it. Maria found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, the easy joy of the little girl infectious and grounding all at once. As they sat together later, coloring at the kitchen table, Lily looked up with the innocent bluntness only a child could manage. "Are you going to be my new mommy?" Maria's hand paused mid-stroke on the paper, her heart skipping unexpectedly. She chose her words carefully, unwilling to make promises that weren't hers to make. "I don't know about that, sweetheart, but I really like spending time with you and your daddy." Lily seemed satisfied with the answer, already moving on to coloring a purple sun. "Good. I like you a lot. Daddy smiles more since he met you." The comment settled warmly in Maria's chest, though it also carried a quiet weight, a reminder of how much trust had already been placed in her, however unintentionally. She glanced at the clock, aware that Daniel would be returning soon, and found herself hoping, more than she expected, that this small taste of family life wouldn't be fleeting. Daniel returned just after noon, exhaustion evident on his face from a stressful morning at work. But the moment he stepped inside and saw Lily's paint-stained hands and Maria's flour-dusted apron, his tired expression melted into something softer. "Looks like I missed quite the morning," he said, smiling as Lily ran to greet him. "We made pancakes and had a dance party," Lily announced proudly. "Maria's really good at both." "Is that so?" Daniel said, raising an eyebrow toward Maria with a playful grin. "She's a tough critic," Maria said, gesturing toward Lily. "But I think I passed the pancake test." As Lily ran off to gather her drawings to show her father, Daniel turned to Maria, his expression growing more serious. I mean it, Maria. Thank you for today. It means more than you know, having someone I trust to lean on. You don't have to thank me, Maria said gently. I meant what I said. I wanted to. Daniel studied her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. I've been thinking, he said slowly. My mother wants to meet you. She's invited us both to dinner this weekend. Maria felt her stomach tighten at the mention of Patricia, memories of Daniel's earlier hesitance about his mother's opinions resurfacing in her mind. Are you sure that's a good idea? She asked carefully. I think it's important, Daniel said. I want her to see how happy you make Lily and me. I know she has her doubts, but I'm hoping she'll come around once she actually gets to know you. Maria hesitated, old insecurities whispering doubts she thought she had begun to silence. She thought of her own mother's careful comments, disguised concern that always left her feeling smaller. She wondered if Patricia's doubts would prove similar, or worse. Okay, she finally said, forcing steadiness into her voice. I'll come. Daniel's expression softened with gratitude. Thank you. I know it's not easy, walking into something like that. But I'll be right there with you. The weekend arrived faster than Maria would have liked. She stood in front of her closet for nearly an hour, trying on and discarding outfit after outfit. Each choice weighed carefully against the imagined judgment of a woman she hadn't yet met. Finally, she settled on a simple, deep green dress, one that made her feel confident rather than merely presentable. When Daniel picked her up that evening, his eyes lit up appreciatively. You look beautiful, he said, opening the car door for her. Thank you, Maria replied, smoothing the fabric of her dress nervously. I hope your mother thinks so too. She will, Daniel said, though his reassurance carried a note of forced confidence that didn't entirely ease Maria's nerves. They arrived at Patricia's home, a well-kept house with a manicured lawn and an atmosphere of quiet formality. Patricia greeted them at the door, her smile polite but measured, her eyes sweeping over Maria with an assessment she didn't bother to hide entirely. You must be Maria, Patricia said, extending a hand. Daniel has told me quite a bit about you. All good things, I hope, Maria said, offering a warm smile despite the nervous flutter in her chest. We'll see, Patricia replied, her tone light but carrying an edge that made Maria's smile falter slightly. Dinner proceeded with careful, polite conversation, Patricia asking pointed questions about Maria's career, her family, her long-term plans. Maria answered each question honestly, doing her best to remain composed, despite the subtle scrutiny lacing every exchange. Lily, blissfully unaware of the tension simmering beneath the surface, chattered happily throughout the meal, occasionally breaking the careful formality with her innocent observations. Maria makes the best pancakes, Lily announced at one point, completely unprompted. Better than Daddy's. Is that so? Patricia said, glancing toward Maria with an unreadable expression. She's exaggerating, Maria said modestly. Your son is an excellent cook. Patricia's gaze lingered on Maria a moment longer, before shifting the conversation elsewhere, though the tension didn't fully dissipate. As dinner wound to a close, Patricia excused herself to fetch dessert, leaving Daniel and Maria alone at the table with Lily, who had grown quiet as sleepiness began to settle over her. You're doing great, Daniel whispered, reaching for Maria's hand under the table. I know she can come across as harsh, but she'll warm up. Maria nodded, though doubt lingered heavily in her chest. She had faced skepticism before, but something about Patricia's carefully measured scrutiny felt different, more calculated, more difficult to overcome through simple kindness alone. As the evening drew to a close and they said their goodbyes, Patricia's parting words to Maria carried a subtle weight that lingered long after they left. It was lovely meeting you, Patricia said, her tone polite but distant. I do hope you understand how important it is that Daniel and Lily are protected, especially after everything they've already been through. Maria nodded carefully, unsure how to respond to the implied warning beneath the words. I understand completely, she said quietly. Their happiness matters to me too. Patricia offered a thin smile before turning back inside, leaving Maria standing on the porch with a heavy, uncertain feeling settling in her chest. As they drove home, Lily, asleep in the back seat, Daniel reached for Maria's hand once more, sensing her quiet unease. "She'll come around," he said softly. "Give her time." Maria nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia's doubts ran deeper than simple unfamiliarity. Doubts that echoed painfully close to the insecurities Maria had spent years trying to silence within herself. As the city lights blurred past the car window, she wondered, quietly and fearfully, whether love built on such uncertain ground could truly withstand the pressures still waiting ahead. The following Monday, Maria found herself replaying the dinner, over and over, during a quiet stretch at the hospital. Grace noticed the distracted look on her face almost immediately and pulled her aside during their break. "You've got that face again," Grace said, handing Maria a cup of coffee. "Except this time, it's not the good kind of distracted." "What happened?" Maria sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "I met Daniel's mother this weekend. It didn't go the way I hoped." "Let me guess," Grace said, leaning against the wall. "She had opinions about your weight." "She didn't say it outright," Maria admitted, "but it was there, underneath everything. The careful questions, the way she looked at me. She basically told me to make sure I don't hurt them, like I'm some kind of risk." Grace's expression softened with sympathy. "That's rough, but you know that's about her own fear, not about who you actually are, right?" "I know that logically," Maria said, "but it's hard not to let it get under my skin. I've spent so long trying not to care what people think, and then one dinner with her undoes half of it." Grace placed a reassuring hand on Maria's shoulder. "You've handled worse than one skeptical mother-in-law type. Remember the guy at the diner? You stood tall after that too, eventually. This isn't any different." Maria managed a small smile at the reminder. "I guess you're right. It's just, Daniel means a lot to me already. And Lily. I don't want to be the reason things get complicated for them." "If Daniel is the man you've described," Grace said firmly, "then he already knows what matters. His mother's approval is a bonus, not a requirement. Don't forget that." Maria nodded, letting Grace's words settle over her, some of the earlier tension in her chest easing slightly. She thought of Daniel's hand finding hers under the table at dinner, steady and reassuring despite his mother's cool reception. She thought of Lily's innocent declaration that Daniel smiled more since meeting her. Small moments, but ones that mattered more than a single evening of scrutiny. That evening, Daniel called as she was preparing dinner, his voice warm through the phone. "I wanted to check in. You seemed quiet after we left my mother's place." "I'm okay," Maria said, though her tone carried a trace of lingering doubt. "Just processing, I guess." "Your mom made it pretty clear she has concerns." Daniel was quiet for a moment before responding. "She does. But those concerns are about her own fears, not about you specifically. She's been protective of Lily and me since Rachel passed. It's not an excuse, but I want you to understand where it comes from." "I understand that," Maria said gently. "I just don't want to be the reason there's tension in your family." "You're not the reason," Daniel said firmly. "If anything, you've been the reason things have felt lighter around here. Lily's happier. I'm happier. My mother will come around, or she won't, but either way, that doesn't change how I feel about you." Maria felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, the earlier uncertainty softening beneath his steady reassurance. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. "It helps more than you know." "I mean every word," Daniel replied. "Give it time. She'll see what I see, eventually." They talked a while longer, the conversation drifting into easier topics. Lily's latest obsession with dinosaurs, plans for the coming weekend, small ordinary details that felt comforting in their simplicity. By the time they said goodnight, Maria felt steadier than she had since leaving Patricia's house, the earlier doubt replaced with a quiet, renewed confidence in what she and Daniel were building together. Still, as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a small part of her couldn't fully shake the weight of Patricia's parting words. She wondered how much patience it would take before approval, if it ever came, and whether her own insecurities, so carefully guarded and slowly softened over the past few weeks, could withstand another round of pressure, should things grow more difficult before they grew easier. For now, though, she chose to hold on to Daniel's reassurance and the memory of Lily's small hand slipping into hers earlier that week, trusting and unafraid. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she reminded herself, she wasn't facing them alone anymore. And that, she decided, was worth holding on to, regardless of how uncertain the road ahead might still prove to be. The voice on the other end of the hospital lobby stopped Maria cold. "Maria, wow, it's been a while." She turned slowly, her stomach dropping the moment she recognized the man standing near the reception desk. Ethan, her ex-boyfriend, the same man whose careless words years ago had first taught her to doubt whether she deserved to be loved fully and without condition. He looked the same as she remembered, confident smile, expensive jacket, an easy charm that had once fooled her into overlooking the cruelty beneath it. "Ethan," she said carefully, keeping her tone neutral despite the sudden tightness in her chest. "What are you doing here?" "Visiting a friend," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the hallway behind him. "Small world, huh? You look good." The pause before his final word carried an unmistakable weight, the same subtle undertone that had once made her feel perpetually inadequate throughout their entire relationship. She resisted the urge to shrink beneath his gaze the way she once had. "Thank you," she said simply, refusing to offer him more than necessary. "I should get back to work." "Wait," Ethan said, stepping slightly to block her path. "I heard you're seeing someone." "Some contractor with a kid." Maria's jaw tightened. "That's really not your business, Ethan." "I just don't want to see you get hurt," he said, his tone shifting to something falsely gentle. "Single dads come with a lot of baggage, Maria. And let's be honest, you've never been great at handling rejection when it inevitably comes." The words landed exactly where he intended, old insecurities flaring instantly beneath his calculated cruelty. Maria felt her hands curl into fists at her sides, years of hurt threatening to resurface all at once. "I'm not the same person you used to manipulate," she said, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. "And Daniel isn't you. He's shown me more respect in a few weeks than you managed in 2 years." Ethan's expression flickered with irritation, his charm slipping slightly at her unexpected pushback. "We'll see how long that lasts," he muttered, before turning and walking away without another word. Maria stood frozen for a long moment after he left, her heart pounding, old wounds reopened by the brief but painful encounter. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to push through the rest of her shift, despite the unease settling heavily in her chest. That evening, she debated whether to mention the encounter to Daniel, unwilling to burden him with old history, while their relationship still felt delicate against the backdrop of his mother's continued skepticism. But as they sat together after dinner, Lily already asleep upstairs, Daniel noticed the distracted look on her face and gently pressed for the truth. "Something's bothering you," he said softly. "You've barely touched your food." Maria hesitated before finally explaining the encounter with Ethan, her voice tightening as she recounted his careless words. Daniel's expression darkened with quiet anger as he listened, his hand finding hers protectively across the table. "He doesn't get to say things like that to you," Daniel said firmly. "Not anymore." "I know," Maria said. It brought back a lot of old feelings I thought I'd moved past." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "You have moved past them. Running into him doesn't erase everything you've built since then. It doesn't erase us." Maria managed a small, grateful smile, though the unease from earlier hadn't fully faded. As if the universe intended to test that fragile reassurance further, her phone buzzed moments later with a message from Patricia, requesting a private conversation with Maria the following afternoon. Maria stared at the message, apprehension knotting tightly in her stomach. She showed it to Daniel, watching his expression shift from confusion to concern. "I'll come with you," he offered immediately. "No," Maria said, surprising herself with her own firmness. "I think I need to face this on my own. If your mother has concerns, I'd rather hear them directly." Daniel studied her for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. "Just promise me you won't let her make you doubt what we have." "I'll try," Maria said, though the promise felt uncertain even as she spoke it. The following afternoon, Maria arrived at a quiet cafe where Patricia had suggested they meet. Patricia was already seated, her expression composed but unmistakably serious. "Thank you for coming," Patricia said as Maria sat down across from her. "I wanted to speak with you honestly, without Daniel or Lily present." "Of course," Maria said, folding her hands carefully in her lap, bracing herself for whatever difficult conversation lay ahead. Patricia studied her for a long moment before speaking. I've watched my son struggle for 2 years since Rachel passed. Lily has struggled too, more than she often shows. I need to know that whatever this is between you and Daniel isn't simply a passing comfort before something more suitable comes along. The implication behind her words stung sharply, but Maria forced herself to remain composed. I understand your concern, she said carefully, but I care about Daniel and Lily deeply. This isn't temporary for me. Forgive me if I remain skeptical, Patricia said, her tone edged with cool doubt. You must understand how it looks. My son, vulnerable and grieving, drawn to someone who so publicly needed rescuing herself. It concerns me that this relationship began from a place of pity rather than genuine partnership. The words hit harder than Maria expected, an old, familiar fear resurfacing painfully beneath Patricia's careful accusation. She had wondered the same thing herself, quietly, late at night, whether Daniel's initial kindness had been rooted in something less permanent than genuine affection. I don't know what to say to convince you otherwise, Maria said quietly, her voice slightly unsteady. All I can tell you is that what Daniel and I have grown into feels real. Lily's happiness feels real. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm just asking for the chance to prove it, over time. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, studying Maria with an expression that had softened only slightly. Time will tell, she finally said. I hope, for everyone's sake, that you're right. The conversation ended shortly after, leaving Maria drained and unsettled as she walked back to her car. Between Ethan's cruel resurfacing and Patricia's pointed doubts, the fragile confidence she had slowly built over the past few weeks felt suddenly precarious again, old insecurities creeping back in, despite her best efforts to hold them at bay. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, Maria found herself staring at old photographs from years before Daniel, back when Ethan's cruelty had first convinced her she was too much, too big, too flawed to ever be fully chosen by anyone. She thought of Patricia's words, of pity rather than partnership, and wondered, despite everything Daniel had said, whether some deeply buried part of her still believed them to be true. Her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, checking in after her meeting with his mother. Maria stared at the screen for a long moment before finally responding, her fingers hesitant. It didn't go great, she typed. I think I need some space to think tonight. Granules. Reply came quickly, laced with concern. Whatever she said, please don't let it change how you see yourself. Or us. Maria set the phone aside without responding further, curling into her couch, as old doubts swirled heavily around her. For the first time since meeting Daniel, she found herself questioning whether she had the strength to keep fighting for something that seemed to invite so much resistance from every direction, or whether it might simply be easier, safer, to retreat once more into the careful solitude she had spent years building around her heart. Over the next 2 days, Maria kept her distance, answering Daniel's messages with short, polite replies instead of the warm, easy conversations they had grown used to. She told herself she needed space to think clearly, away from the pull of his voice and the ache of missing Lily's bright laughter, but the truth was closer to fear. Fear that Patricia was right, fear that Ethan's cruel words carried some hidden truth she hadn't yet outrun, fear that choosing to stay would only lead to a slower, more devastating version of the same heartbreak she had already survived once. On the third evening, her phone rang, Daniel's name lighting up the screen. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something in her relented, and she answered. Hey, Daniel said, his voice careful, as though testing the distance between them. I miss you. Lily keeps asking when you're coming back. Maria's throat tightened at the mention of Lily. I miss her too, she admitted. I miss both of you. Then talk to me, Daniel said gently. Whatever my mother said, whatever's going on in your head right now, I want to understand it. Don't shut me out. Maria sank onto her couch, pressing her palm against her forehead. I keep thinking about what she said, about pity instead of partnership. And then Ethan showed up out of nowhere saying almost the same thing, and it just feels like maybe the universe is trying to tell me something. The universe isn't telling you anything, Daniel said, his voice firm but kind. 2 people with their own reasons to doubt you said cruel things. That's not a sign, Maria. That's just cruelty, wearing different faces. How do you know for certain this isn't just you feeling guilty or lonely and mistaking that for something more? Maria asked quietly, voicing the fear she hadn't dared speak aloud until now. Daniel was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a rare vulnerability. Because I've been lonely before, Maria. I was lonely for 2 years after Rachel died, surrounded by people who cared but couldn't reach the parts of me that felt hollow. What I feel with you isn't loneliness looking for an exit. It's the first time since losing her that I've felt like myself again, fully, without pretending. That's not pity. That's not desperation. That's just you. Maria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, his words settling deep into the doubt she had been carrying since her conversation with Patricia. I want to believe that, she whispered. Then believe it, Daniel said. Please. Don't let their voices become louder than what you know to be true. They talked for a while longer, the tension between them slowly easing, though Maria still felt a lingering hesitation she couldn't fully shake. Before hanging up, Daniel added quietly, take whatever time you need. But please don't disappear on me completely. Lily and we'd rather have you close, even while you're figuring things out. After the call ended, Maria sat in the quiet of her apartment, turning his words over in her mind. She thought of Ethan's calculated cruelty, so practiced and familiar, designed to make her small. She thought of Patricia's careful skepticism, rooted in genuine fear for her son and granddaughter, rather than deliberate unkindness. And she thought of Daniel, steady and unwavering, choosing her again and again, despite every external pressure urging him otherwise. The next morning, Maria arrived at work still unsettled, her mind elsewhere despite the demands of her shift. During a brief lull, Grace found her staring blankly at a patient chart, lost in thought. You've been off for days, Grace said, concern etched across her face. What's going on? Maria explained everything in a low voice. The encounter with Ethan, the difficult conversation with Patricia, her own retreat into old fears over the past few days. Grace listened patiently, her expression growing more resolute as Maria finished. Listen to me, Grace said firmly. You've spent years letting other people's insecurities convince you that you're not enough. Ethan's cruelty isn't truth, it's projection. And Patricia's fear isn't about you. It's about losing her son to grief, and then having to trust someone new with what's left of her family. Neither of those things are actually about your worth. I know that logically, Maria said quietly, but knowing it and feeling it are different things. Then let Daniel's actions speak louder than their words, Grace said. He stood up for you in a crowded diner before he even knew your name. He's been consistent every step of the way since then. That's not the behavior of someone acting out of pity or loneliness. That's the behavior of someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. Maria absorbed her friend's words, something within her steadying slightly, despite the lingering uncertainty. She thought of Daniel's voice on the phone the night before, quiet and sincere, insisting she was the reason he felt like himself again. She thought of Lily's small hand in hers, trusting and unafraid. By the end of her shift, Maria had made a decision. She would stop letting fear dictate her choices, stop assuming the worst simply because cruelty had taught her to expect it. She would give Daniel, and herself, the chance they both deserved, without the shadow of Ethan's bitterness or Patricia's doubt, clouding what she already knew to be true in her heart. She sent Daniel a message on her way home that evening. I'm ready to talk properly. Can I come by tonight? His reply came almost instantly. Of course, we'll be here. As Maria drove toward Daniel's house that evening, the weight that had settled over her the past few days began to lift, replaced by a quiet, determined resolve. She didn't know exactly what challenges still lay ahead, whether Patricia would ever fully accept her, whether Ethan would resurface again with more careless cruelty, but she knew, with growing certainty, that she no longer wanted to face those uncertainties alone, hidden safely behind walls built from old wounds. She wanted to face them beside Daniel and Lily, choosing courage over fear, for as long as they were willing to choose her in return. The doorbell rang 3 times before Daniel finally answered, and the moment he opened it, Maria knew something was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed, a phone clutched tightly in his hand. Behind him, Lily sat on the stairs, unusually quiet, hugging her stuffed rabbit close to her chest. "Daniel, what happened?" Maria asked, stepping inside immediately, all her earlier hesitation forgotten in the face of his obvious distress. "My mother," Daniel said, his voice tight. "She collapsed this afternoon. She's at the hospital now. They think it might be her heart." Maria's own worries about their relationship evaporated instantly, replaced by urgent concern. "Is she stable?" "They're running tests," Daniel said, running a shaking hand through his hair. "I need to go, but I don't have anyone to watch Lily on such short notice. And I'll stay with her," Maria said immediately, not a trace of hesitation in her voice. "Go, be with your mother. Lily and I will be fine." Daniel looked at her, gratitude and relief flooding his exhausted expression. "Are you sure? After everything?" "None of that matters right now," Maria said firmly. "Go, Daniel. I've got Lily." He nodded, gathering his keys with trembling hands. Before leaving, he knelt down to Lily, who looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "I'm going to go check on Grandma, okay? Maria's going to stay with you. I'll call as soon as I know more." Lily nodded silently, her small hand tightening around her stuffed rabbit. Daniel kissed the top of her head before hurrying out the door, leaving Maria alone with the frightened child. Maria sat down beside Lily on the stairs, wrapping an arm gently around her small shoulders. "Hey," she said softly, "it's going to be okay. Your daddy's going to take good care of Grandma." "What if she doesn't get better?" Lily whispered, her voice trembling. Maria pulled her closer, choosing her words carefully. "Doctors are going to do everything they can to help her. And no matter what happens, you're not alone. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." They spent the next few hours together, Maria doing her best to keep Lily distracted with quiet games and gentle conversation, though both of them remained acutely aware of the silent phone sitting on the counter, waiting for news. Around 9 that evening, it finally rang. Maria answered quickly. "Daniel, how is she?" "She's stable," Daniel said, exhaustion evident in his voice. It was a minor heart episode, not as serious as they initially feared. They want to keep her overnight for observation, but the doctors are optimistic. Relief flooded through Maria. "That's wonderful news. Lily's been so worried." "Can I talk to her?" Daniel asked. Maria handed the phone to Lily, watching as the little girl's tense shoulders relaxed, while her father reassured her that Grandma was going to be okay. After a few minutes, Lily handed the phone back, a small, exhausted smile finally returning to her face. "I'll be home soon," Daniel told Maria. "Thank you, for tonight, for everything. Just come home safe," Maria said softly. "We'll be here." Daniel arrived a little over an hour later, looking drained but relieved. He found Maria and Lily curled together on the couch, Lily having finally drifted off to sleep against Maria's shoulder. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, simply watching the peaceful scene before him, something shifting visibly in his expression. "Thank you," he whispered, careful not to wake his daughter, "for staying, for not walking away, even after everything." "I told you I wasn't going anywhere," Maria whispered back. Daniel gently lifted Lily into his arms, carrying her upstairs to bed, while Maria waited quietly in the living room. When he returned, he sat down beside her, running a tired hand over his face. "I need to tell you something," he said. "While I was at the hospital, waiting for news about my mother, all I could think about was you. Not in a selfish way, but because I realized how much you've already become part of this family, even during moments as uncertain as these. My mother's fear, Ethan's cruelty, none of that changes what I know to be true. I love you, Maria. Not out of loneliness, not out of pity. I love you because you make every hard moment easier just by being here." Maria felt tears welling in her eyes, his words settling deeply into the doubt she had carried for days. "I love you too," she whispered. "I was scared, Daniel. Scared that maybe they were right, that this was too good to last. But sitting here tonight, waiting for news with Lily, realizing how much I already care about both of you, I know now that fear was never truth. It was just old wounds, trying to protect me from something that actually feels safe." Daniel reached for her hand, holding it gently. "I'm sorry my mother made you doubt that." "She's scared too," Maria said softly. "Scared of losing what's left of her family, After everything you've already been through. I understand that now, even if it still hurt. The following days brought quiet, steady healing. Patricia recovered fully from her heart episode, and during a visit to check on her, Daniel finally confronted her gently but firmly about her earlier treatment of Maria. "Mom, I love you, and I understand your fear," he said, sitting beside her hospital bed. "But Maria isn't a threat to our family. She's become part of it. I need you to give her the same chance you'd want given to you." Patricia was quiet for a long moment, studying her son's earnest expression. "You really love her," she finally said, not quite a question. "More than I thought I could again," Daniel admitted. "And Lily loves her too. I'm not asking you to pretend everything's perfect overnight. I'm just asking you to try." Patricia's gaze softened slightly, years of protective fear giving way, just barely, to quiet acceptance. "I suppose," she said slowly, "if she's willing to stay through nights like the one we just had, then perhaps I've misjudged her intentions." It wasn't an immediate transformation, but it was a beginning, a small crack of light through walls that had stood firm for months. Weeks later, on a warm evening, Daniel suggested they return to the same diner where everything had first begun, the place where cruelty had once tried to convince Maria she was unworthy of love, and where kindness had risen instead to prove otherwise. Maria hesitated briefly at the familiar entrance, old memories flickering uncomfortably, but Daniel's steady hand in hers grounded her firmly in the present. Inside, they settled into a booth near the same corner where the humiliating incident had unfolded months before. Lily chattered excitedly beside them, utterly unaware of the significance the location held for the two adults across from her. As they ate, Daniel reached across the table, taking Maria's hand in his. "I wanted to come back here," he said quietly, "because I wanted you to remember this place, not for what almost broke you, but for what it gave you instead." Maria smiled, tears gathering in her eyes as she glanced around the familiar diner, filled now not with cruelty, but with warmth and quiet gratitude. "It gave me you," she said softly. "Both of you." Daniel squeezed her hand gently before standing, drawing curious glances from nearby tables as he knelt down beside their booth. Lily gasped in delighted surprise as her father pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "Maria," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "you walked into our lives during a moment meant to tear you down, and instead, you became the reason Lily and I found our way back to happiness. I don't want to imagine our future without you in it. Will you marry us, officially, and let me spend the rest of my life choosing you, fully and without condition, the way you deserve?" The diner had gone quiet again, much like the night months before, but this time, the silence carried no cruelty, only warmth, as strangers watched with soft smiles, sensing the significance of the moment unfolding before them. Maria, tears streaming freely down her cheeks, nodded through a trembling smile. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with happiness. "Yes, absolutely yes." The diner erupted into gentle applause as Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, Lily bouncing excitedly beside them, thrilled at the prospect of Maria becoming a permanent part of their small, resilient family. Where cruelty had once tried to convince Maria she was too big to be loved, kindness, patience, and unwavering devotion had proven otherwise, transforming a moment of humiliation into the foundation of a lifetime built on genuine, unconditional love. As they left the diner that evening, Lily held tightly to both their hands, swinging happily between them, chattering excitedly about wedding cakes and flower dresses. Maria glanced back once at the booth where it had all begun, feeling not the sting of old wounds, but the quiet, steady warmth of a love that had proven, beyond any doubt, that she had always been worthy of exactly this.